We all know sex sells, but we're giving you the sexiest compilation ever for free. It turns out we've answered a lot of questions about sex over the years, from common misconceptions about human sex to the unusual ways other animals go about it. First up, as you might expect, a lot of people like to watch videos of sex, and it turns out a lot of people like to watch videos about those videos. Our most viewed SciShow Psych video as of 2021 is one of those.
For better or worse, the internet brings people together from distant corners of the world and has information on every conceivable topic. And of course, that includes porn. There's some debate about how much of the internet is actually pornographic content, but if you look for it, you'll find it. So, how does it affect people's brains, attitudes, and behaviors? The short answer is, it's complicated and there's a lot we don't know, but we have studied some of the risks and yes, even possible benefits of watching pornography. So you know, some of these studies talk about disturbing behaviors like sexual violence and rape, just in case you would like to avoid those things. Most research on pornography is correlational. There aren't volunteers who get randomly assigned to watch a bunch of explicit videos to see what happens to their brains. Instead, lots of studies involve surveys asking people about their behaviors and traits in addition to how much porn they watch. On top of that, everyone who participates needs to consent to being in a study about pornography, which might mean some people self-select out of this. All that to say, we can't be sure if these findings apply to everyone or even most people, but they're a start. Some research has found that watching a lot of pornography might reflect differences in people's brains, especially in a part called the striatum. The striatum is involved in reward processing and consistently gets activated during sexual arousal, among other regions. Sexual arousal is a workout for a lot of your brain. 2 MRI studies tested about 70 male participants by showing them sexy pictures, and the men who felt their pornography use was addictive or problematic had more activity in the ventral striatum compared to those who didn't. Another study found that how much porn men watched was negatively correlated with the size of a part of the striatum called the right caudate, as well as the connectivity between the striatum and other parts of the brain. The researchers of that study say it's possible that people who watch a lot of pornography stimulate this reward system a lot and actually rewire their brain to need more stimulation. But they also note that these brain differences might not be caused by porn. In other words, people with a smaller striatum may need more stimulation to experience pleasure and seek out more pornography. With this kind of correlational research, you can't really tell which of the two it is. Another question that comes up a lot is whether viewing pornography can be cathartic, basically a safe outlet for certain emotions. For instance, psychologists have tried to study how it affects aggression. If you look at the general pattern across the US as pornography has become easier to access over the past few decades, rates of violent crime like rape have gone down. And there's a similar pattern if you look at when pornography has become widely available in other countries too. But like we mentioned before, this is just a correlation, and not all studies show this link. For example, a 2016 meta-analysis in the Journal of Communication looked at 22 different studies that asked people about their porn viewing and self-reported sexual aggression, things like using force, verbal harassment, or other threatening behaviors. And they found that more porn viewing was related to higher levels of verbal and physical sexual aggression, particularly if the porn had violent content. This suggests that behavioral modeling might be at work, that people who see a behavior in others, even on a screen, are more likely to do it themselves. So psychologists have tried to make sense of these contradictory data. One 2012 study published in the Journal of Criminal Justice might help shed some light. The relationship between porn and aggression could have to do with timing. The researchers asked over 600 adult men who were convicted of sex crimes about their history of watching pornography. They found that regularly watching pornography during adolescence was linked with more severe crimes committed as adults, including more humiliation of their victims. So maybe early exposure to aggressive sexual behavior played a part in that. And if the convicts had reported viewing porn just before their offense, their crimes were less severe, so catharsis may have been involved. But there are also lots of factors that lead to violent crime, so again, without causal evidence, we don't know if or how pornography is directly linked. Plus, the sample sizes of studies like that are relatively small because most people don't commit violent crimes. It's a little easier to measure something like sexism, since anyone can report their attitudes about men and women, and do all the time. It's the internet. According to 2 studies published in the Journal of Sex Research in 2015 and 2017 that looked at the habits of tens of thousands of Americans, using pornography is associated associated with more egalitarian views, things like wanting women in the workplace and in positions of power. But the story is different when it comes to rape myths, like the idea that what someone's wearing can excuse violence against them. Surveys of hundreds of college students have found that men and women who view porn, especially violent porn, are more likely to believe rape myths. Finally, when it comes to your overall well-being, several studies suggest that whether porn is good or bad for you may depend on whether you think it is. One study of over 2,000 people found that watching porn was linked with an increase in self-reported symptoms of depression, but that effect was mainly seen in the 10% who watched despite their moral opposition to it. The researchers supposed that those people were distressed by the dissonance between their moral ideals and their actions. For those who weren't morally opposed, only the people who watched pornography like several times a week or more reported more symptoms of depression. And the researchers figured the opposite could be happening here. These people may be depressed and using porn to cope. So there do seem to be some risks associated with watching a lot of pornography, but it might not be all bad. More than anything, we need more research to really know if and how much it affects us, because psychology and the human brain and our behavior is complicated.
So pornography is popular, and there's a lot of nuance to how it affects different people's brains. And the science of how we evolved to do the deed in our own unique human way isn't all that straightforward either. Like, why don't humans have penis bones? After all, a ton of other animals do. Here's Michael to tell you more about that.
If you only clicked this video because you saw the words penis bones, welcome. I hope you learned something. Penis bones, a literal bone inside a penis, aka os penis or a baculum, are a totally real thing, and they're a legit scientific topic. You may not be familiar with them though, because no matter what anyone might claim, humans don't have them. Very rarely, someone will form a bone in their penis because of a buildup of calcium, but that's not a true baculum. Plenty of other mammals though do have a baculum. Mice, cats, your dog in fact. It's probably easier to list out the mammals that don't have them than those that do. Even tiny pikas have real bone down there. So do our closest relatives, chimpanzees. And some female mammals even sport a baculum equivalent called a barbellum, which is a clitoral bone. Just a handful of primates, including spider and woolly monkeys, are like us. So what happened to our penis bones? The question has puzzled scientists for years and may say more about our sexual practices than you'd think. The first thing you might notice about bacula, if you took a bunch from lots of different animals, is how diverse they are. Some are small, like the length of a fingernail, and others are massive, like one extinct walrus's 1.5 meter penis bone. That record holder sold for $8,000 at an auction, an amount that was actually considered disappointingly small. Bacula also differ wildly in shape. Some are relatively straight, while others look like hooks or even tridents. Biologists think that the baculum is the most diverse bone in the entire body, and they seem pretty important for reproduction, but exactly how they're important isn't so obvious. One idea is that penis bones help stimulate ovulation, which is when females release oocytes, or egg cells, and are capable of becoming pregnant. While humans ovulate spontaneously, many mammals, including ferrets, cats, and mice, are induced ovulators, meaning they ovulate only once they've had sex. The only problem is having a penis bone doesn't correlate so well with being an induced ovulator. Cats, for instance, which are notorious induced ovulators, have much smaller bacula relative to their size than dogs and wolves, which are spontaneous ovulators. Another possibility is that the penis bone makes it easier to get inside the female's vaginal opening, but that's also problematic because penis bones aren't more common in species with bigger size differences between males and females. So in a study published in 2016, 2 anthropologists decided to get to the bottom of the bacula mystery by looking at the evolutionary biology behind the penis bone. They thought a third possibility, known as prolonged intromission, was more likely. It had been tested before, although the earlier results had been mixed. Really, prolonged intromission is just a technical term for very long sex. A longer penetration time prevents the female from going off and having sex with other males, so the male sperm is more likely to fertilize an egg. As you might expect, a bone is useful for this purpose because it can basically act as a supportive rod. It keeps everything safely erect, including the urethra, which is important because that's how the sperm get where they need to go. The researchers found that for primates, longer sex times correlated with having a baculum, and with how long the penis bones were. Generally, once animals had evolved long intromission times, or anything more than 3 minutes, they kept their penis bones. It's when those times were short that species lost them, including us. Because, yes, scientists have studied this, and the typical penetration time is only about 2 minutes. All in all, the team concluded that bacula evolved some 95 to 145 million years ago, after the evolution of the first placental mammals, but before primates and carnivores split, so bacula were the default for our ancestors. They also noticed that primates that were seasonal breeders or polygamous had longer bacula. This goes along with the idea that bacula are most helpful in species facing high post-copulatory sexual selection, where there's competition from other males' sperm. Experiments in polygamous house mice, where researchers varied the level of sexual pressure, found that they could actually change the mice's baculum length over 27 generations. When the mice were under more pressure, their penis bones got wider. Humans, though, have much less of this sexual pressure, in part because we're mostly monogamous. Monogamy evolved in early humans millions of years ago and might have contributed to the loss of our penis bones. We just didn't really need them. But don't worry, we appear to have compensated in other ways for our missing bones, at least in terms of making sure sperm can get through. The human penis has a piece of connective tissue called the distal ligament, which helps keep it stiff enough for sex, no bone necessary. At least, not a literal one.
There are plenty of myths and misunderstandings out there about the human body. If those last 2 videos blew your mind, just wait for this next one. It's a whole list of things we still get wrong about human reproduction. Most adults think they have a pretty good understanding of how people make more people, but there are a lot of things related to human reproduction that we get wrong. Like, you've probably heard that you can't get pregnant if you're on your period, but that's not necessarily true. Or you might think that it's the fastest swimming sperm that gets to fertilize the egg, except that's not true either. Sometimes we get these things wrong because scientists are still making new discoveries, and they've learned a few things since our generation last took sex ed. And sometimes it's just misinformation. Either way, we here at SciShow are here to set the record straight, so let's talk about sex. Now, one of the most durable beliefs when it comes to human reproduction is that people are born with all of the egg cells they'll ever have. And to be fair, this was kind of the dominant idea for a long time. But in the last 15 years or so, new discoveries seem to have turned this on its head. While we tend to call them eggs, when we're talking about human reproduction, what we really mean are ova, female reproductive cells released during ovulation. They're produced in ovaries from immature cells, called oocytes. And since the 1950s, it's been thought that oocytes are all made during fetal development. So the ovaries were essentially thought of as long-term storage facilities. And we knew this no new oocytes after birth idea wasn't true for other animals, but we thought mammals, including humans, were special. But since the mid-2000s, the evidence has been mounting that we were just wrong. The first big break was a mouse study in 2004. They found a specific kind of stem cell in the ovaries called oogonial stem cells, which can create new oocytes even in adulthood. Since then, other studies in mice, rats, cows, non-human primates, and pigs have confirmed that these stem cells can contribute to the pool of eggs used in natural reproductive cycles. And in 2012, we found similar stem cells in people too, as well as evidence that the human versions can produce oocytes. So although we have yet to definitively demonstrate that these stem cells make new eggs in adult humans, that they do in other animals and their existence in people suggests that in the end, humans may be able to make new eggs during their lifetime. This is a good example of science correcting itself, but it's also cool because this discovery could lead to new treatments for infertility. It's possible we could coax these stem cells to make more eggs when we want them to, including outside of the human body, which we've already done in mice. Now, for our next myth, the human menstrual cycle, the cyclical bodily process of preparing for a possible pregnancy, including ovulation and getting a period, is said to be 28 days long, with ovulation occurring 2 weeks after the last period starts. But that's just an average, and it's not necessarily an accurate one. First off, only about 13% of people actually have 28-day cycles, according to a 2019 study of over 120,000 users of a menstrual cycle tracking phone app. 65% of the participants had cycles between 25 and 30 days, but overall, the range was huge. And some people had highly variable cycles, where the length was somewhat unpredictable. But more to the point, the researchers also found that the idea that ovulation occurs precisely on day 14 of a cycle wasn't accurate for most of their participants. In fact, the average length of the follicular phase, the first part of the menstrual cycle which starts with menstruation and continues until ovulation, was nearly 17 days. Even for participants with a 25 to 30 day cycle, it was a little over 15 days on average. And this seems to get shorter with age. Participants in their mid-20s had follicular phases that were on average 3.4 days longer than people in their mid-40s. So the actual timing of ovulation was quite variable, both between individuals and within a person's lifetime, even if their cycles were normal. Which kind of leads on to the next myth. You might have heard that you can't get pregnant on your period. So here's the thing. Sperm can survive for days after sex. That's why the fertile window, the time in a person's cycle when they can get pregnant if they have unprotected sex, is generally defined as the day of ovulation plus the 5 days preceding it. Now, if ovulation does occur precisely 2 weeks after menstruation starts, then yes, the 2 to 7 days you're on your period falls outside the fertile window. But we just learned that that isn't always the case. Back in 2000, scientists published a paper drawing on data from over 200 women in North Carolina who were trying to plan their pregnancies. The scientists were able to estimate each woman's day of ovulation based on urinary hormone levels. One of the participants ovulated a mere 8 days after her period started and got pregnant. Between 6 and 21 days after their last period started, the women had at a minimum a 10% chance of being in their fertile window. Only about 30% of participants had their fertile window entirely within the days of the menstrual cycle identified by clinical guidelines, which for this group was days 10 to 17. This means that, yes, if your period is less than a week long and you ovulate 2 or more weeks after it starts, it's not possible to get pregnant by sex during your period. But not only are the lengths of menstrual cycles highly variable, when a person actually ovulates during their cycle varies too. And that means that for some, it's entirely possible to get pregnant from, quote, period sex. Speaking of pregnancy, the sperm part of conception is usually framed as a mad race. All the sperm are trying to beat each other to the egg waiting at the finish line. But while sperm can and do swim, the one that fertilizes the egg isn't necessarily the best swimmer of the group. The female reproductive tract carries the sperm along, weeds out contenders, boosts up others, and in the end has a huge role in deciding which sperm wins. For example, muscular contractions within the uterus may help move the sperm along. There's also the flow of secretions and cilia, waving hair-like cells, in the fallopian tube. As these move sperm along, though, some are pulled from the race. Immune defenses in the vagina, cervix, and uterus can eliminate sperm, and cervical mucus can weed out abnormal ones. And the sperm that do survive still aren't racing to the finish. When sperm get to the fallopian tube, they may be held or slowed down at a structure called the tubal isthmus. Their interactions with the epithelium, the inner layer of the reproductive tract, can either hyperactivate the sperm and prepare them for fertilization if the egg is ready to go, or slow the whole process down, preserving them until the time is right. This pause may also prevent the egg from being fertilized by multiple sperm at once by only allowing a few sperm at a time to get close to it. It may even narrow down which particular sperm get to the egg. The fallopian tube seems to be able to separate sperm based on their genetic content, including sex chromosomes or whether they have damaged DNA. So if the fastest sperm doesn't pass this screening check, it's not getting anywhere near an egg. Now, when a sperm finally does reach the egg, it doesn't battle its way in as if it was breaking through a wall. The process of fertilization doesn't rely on brute force, but rather on protein interactions between the sperm and various parts of the egg. So it's more like a complex series of secret handshakes, and if the sperm gets any of these wrong, it might be kept out of the egg. And it turns out sperm might also be involved in determining what genes end up in the egg. See, back in the middle of the 2010s, one lab looking at the inheritance patterns of genes in mice and humans started to notice something weird. One of the foundational tenets of genetics is that the half of a parent's genome that's passed onto its offspring is random each time. That should result in a predictable mix of combinations of genes in the next generation. But the researchers were seeing cases where some combinations were far more common than they should be. So they investigated what might be going on using mouse models, but it wasn't any of the usual suspects, like variants that are lethal when combined. In the end, they came to the conclusion that eggs are somehow able to select certain sperm based on their DNA. Or vice versa. They hypothesized this might be because B vitamins somehow act as signaling molecules on the sperm and egg, basically helping with those secret handshakes. This is an appealing idea because B vitamin supplementation during pregnancy has been shown to alter the ratios of genetic combinations. Or maybe we're just kind of wrong about how eggs mature. You see, a cell that will become an ovum undergoes a process called meiosis, which essentially cuts its genome in half, leaving it ready to combine with the half genome the sperm will provide. To do this, the cell first doubles its entire genome, creating copies of each of its 23 pairs of chromosomes, and then divides into 2 daughter cells, the copies sticking with their clones. One of these daughter cells is destined to be the egg, and the other one becomes 1 or 2 supportive polar bodies whose genes don't end up in the embryo. Then the egg to be splits again, separating the chromosomes from their copies to create cells with 1 copy of each of the 23 chromosomes. So the order goes: first sort the pairs, then split them into single strands. But that last split doesn't happen until after fertilization. The thing is, if the order of divisions is reversed and the clones split into single strands first, you get an egg to be with both variants of the original chromosomes. And that means it's possible signals from sperm could influence the results of that final division, thereby choosing which chromosomes end up in the egg, which could explain the skewed ratios scientists have seen. And this weird reverse meiosis has been seen in humans, though we'll need more research to confirm whether sperm actually have any influence over the last step. In the end, when we look at the most up-to-date science, it's clear that we've been getting a lot of things wrong about human reproduction. The fastest sperm isn't necessarily the one that fertilizes the egg. The female reproductive system has ways to transport, delay, direct, and select sperm, and sperm may even influence the genetic makeup of the eggs that they fertilize. And when you combine that with what we've learned about the menstrual cycle and its variability, it becomes clear that we have lots more to learn about human reproduction before we can really say we know how it all works. So we still have a lot to learn about sex within our own species, but we're not the only ones that do it. You know, birds do it and bees do it too. So that leads us to some non-human sex stories that we just couldn't end this compilation without mentioning.
Whether it involves fighting your competition to the death, wearing a flashy outfit, getting peed on, or straight up eaten by your mate, sex in the animal kingdom isn't always easy. In fact, you might say that it's just plain hard. Courtship and mating can be difficult for a lot of different reasons, but one of the worst is probably when it's violent, like in traumatic insemination. It's exactly as bad as it sounds, and it's pretty common behavior among invertebrates, bedbugs for example. Rather than bothering to find her reproductive tract, the male just stabs his mate with his needle-like penis, piercing her abdominal wall and injecting sperm directly into her body cavity. Once inside, the sperm races through her hemolymph, the bedbug equivalent of blood, until it finds her ovaries. This is a pretty raw deal for female bedbugs. Not only do these stabbings leave open wounds at the risk of infection, but that needle thing isn't exactly clean and can introduce all sorts of pathogens into the female's body. But the females seem to have evolved a way to protect themselves, an extra layer in their abdomen called the spermolage. It's right where they tend to get pierced the most and helps absorb some of the trauma and protect against infection. That's one extreme example of sex gone bad, but often the hardest part about sex can be finding a willing partner. Bowerbird males try to solve this problem by wooing females with wealth and even optical illusions. The male birds spend months constructing elaborate, generally arch-like structures called bowers, which is where the bird gets the name. Now, the architectural skills involved might be impressive, but it's the interior decorating that really gets the ladies interested. Males collect and display different small objects like flower petals, colorful bits of plastic, pebbles, all kinds of stuff, and some birds even paint their bowers with chewed up berries, saliva, or charcoal. And in the case of the great bowerbird species, they set up an optical illusion too. The males arrange all that junk so that the bigger pieces are farther from the bower. That way, when a female stands under the bower and looks out, all the objects look like they're the same size. And that works! A male with better illusions will be more successful at getting mates, and ornithologists aren't entirely sure why. One possibility is that it makes the whole area seem smaller than it is, so the male looks bigger in comparison. It could also be that a complicated floor design tells the female her potential date has extra smarts and therefore good genes, or maybe just holds her attention longer. So for some animals, the mating process is dangerous and others spend a lot of time and energy on dating, but sometimes the timing just isn't right. As continuous breeders, we humans can, at least in theory, get it on whenever the mood strikes us. But lots of other animals are only interested in sex during specific times of the year. They are seasonal breeders, meaning that usually a seasonal change in the length of the day triggers a series of hormones that leave the animals fertile and frisky. And when it comes to giant pandas, that timing problem really works against them. Females go into heat once a year and tend to only be open to male attention for a couple of days to a week at the most, and the female is only fertile for 24 to 36 hours of that, which doesn't leave much time for making adorable panda babies. I mean, what if one of them has a headache? That's part of why breeding pandas in captivity is so difficult. You essentially have only a day or so every year to make it happen, and that's assuming that both animals are even in the mood, which they often aren't. Plus, since they have so little practice or opportunity to watch other pandas mating, many captive animals apparently don't know, like, what goes where, and can't figure out how to actually do the sex. Zoo managers have tried helping their pandas get in the mood by showing them panda porn or giving them Viagra. Seriously, both of those are real things, but still, they often have to go the artificial insemination route, which even then does not usually work. So if you want something to be thankful for this Valentine's Day, just be glad that humans usually have it a little easier than bedbugs, bowerbirds, and pandas.
Man, sometimes I just feel so bad for pandas, and kind of for bedbugs too. which is a surprising thought to have. So even though humans still don't have it all figured out when it comes to sex, at least we don't have to construct intricate optical illusions out of tree branches using only our mouths. Thanks for watching this SciShow compilation. If you liked it, you might also enjoy our video on bug mating rituals.